So the first step is have a client dream expansively of what could they do if they had it all. Would they, if they could have everything, if they could retire tomorrow or go part-time and they could have their needs, their wants, and their wishes, what would you want if you literally couldn't fail at it?
This is the Door Roller Money Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Berger. In today's show, we're talking with Roger Whitney. He is the retirement man. Literally, his blog and podcast of the same name are legendary, and his mission is to help people shift what they think is possible in retirement by changing how they live, work, and celebrate what's possible in the present. And boy, do I need that. Roger is a 3-time Plutus Award winner and author of Rock Retirement, a simple guide to help you take control and be more optimistic about the future. He's been ranked by Investopedia as one of the most influential financial advisors for over 5 years, and he created the Rock Retirement Club, which is an online community which provides tools for others to build an amazing retirement. Roger, welcome to the show.
Wow, I always sound impressive on paper, and then I open my mouth.
Well, listen, we can just stop here. It was great having you on the show. Have a good day.
I'm done. No, it's great to be here. Great to be here.
So I want to dive right in. I got a ton of obviously retirement questions to ask you, and I have very much self-interest in this interview. I don't care about the listeners. It's all about me today.
Always.
Yeah, but I want to start actually with your firm, Agile Retirement Management, which, as I understand, is a financial planning firm. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. Focused on retirement. I'd kind of like to know, what do you do for people and how much does it cost? Can we kind of start there? And then I'm going to dive into a bunch of retirement questions.
Sure. So Agile Retirement Management is our firm. We act as project managers in someone's journey towards retirement. So we take very much a project management approach to a financial planning process. Hence, we've borrowed a lot from the Agile methodology, which is how software is developed, right? That's why your phones have to update software all the time, is because they're constantly iterating. And so in the firm, we act as project manager and implement Agile Retirement Management. And we can talk about what exactly that is. We aren't accepting new clients. So
I'm sorry, you are or
are not? Are not.
Oh,
okay. I can talk about that. We walk life with about 80 families and not really trying to grow that beyond what it is. And we charge as a traditional financial advisor. So our fees range anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a year.
And so let's talk about the no new clients. Why will that change in the future? And why did you stop at 80?
Well, so I've been on this journey. So I've been a practicing financial advisor for over 25 years. And you say that when it's over 25 years, so you don't have to say exactly how many years it's been. And
I've done a lot of things for over 25 years.
And I went the journey. So my journey professionally is I worked at a major firm as a traditional financial advisor early in my life. And then in just after 2000, transitioned to establishing an independent firm. And I had 2 business partners, and we grew that to a firm of about 15 or 16 people. And just over the last 4 or 5 years, I've extracted myself from what I've created in order to right size my practice. So I didn't have to do all the things that you have to do when you run a big firm, the compliance, the education, the coaching, all the management responsibilities. And so I right-sized my practice to fit what I want for my stage of life, which is I want to walk life more closely with individuals. I want to have a profitable practice. I want to have a location-independent practice. I want to have time freedom personally. And so I created a firm where I can have all of those things and still actually practice my craft. And so when I extracted myself from the firm, we're building this firm to serve the people we work with, but not just simply to scale, which is generally what business is about, always scaling and getting bigger. I'm trying not to do that.
So do you foresee taking on new clients anytime in the foreseeable future, or not?
I
Not
can
really.
imagine periodically, yes. Yeah, I can imagine periodically,
Okay.
yes.
So then, what we need to know is how folks can perhaps approach retirement the way your firm does, without obviously hiring you. And you mentioned, you see your role as a project manager, which uh, I like that idea. Although I've never really heard of it applied in the financial planning perspective. So how does that work?
So I call myself a classically trained financial planner. So I was trained in the CFP curriculum, and I taught the CFP curriculum to CFP candidates for a number of years. And I equate that to how we used to develop software. It was this huge bloated process where we tried to solve for everything at once to create this thing, which is called a financial plan or a retirement plan. And that is generally how financial planning has been done. And it's all had as the hub investment management.
Yeah, that's
What?
where the money is.
Well, for a lot of reasons, it was, the financial planning process was developed by financial advisors and insurance people. So the natural hub is what their center of the universe is, which are those products, right? That's not necessarily good or bad. It's just how things develop. And in reality, with a modern retiree, say you, someone who's going to retire, the dynamic is different than any generation in history because one, you're going to live longer than any generation before you. Two, you're going to be healthier and more active than any generation before you in the later part of life. Three, you're likely not going to have a pension and be more responsible for your own retirement. All of these things collide where the traditional financial planning approach generally gives you a lot of bad options, right? If you go through a traditional retirement planning process, it actually does net present value, how much you need on the day you retire. And because of the dynamics, you're going to spend more, you're going to live longer, et cetera. Essentially, the math doesn't add up near as often as it used to for people that had pensions and that didn't live long or active lives. And so the solutions that generally advisors offer clients are one, hey, you know what? These numbers, you're probably going to have to work longer than you think, right? Maybe we should have you work longer to make this math work. Or two, we need to probably take on more investment risk to try to get returns to catch up. Three, you probably should start saving more so we can build up a bigger nest egg for when you retire. Or four, maybe we settle for less of what you can spend during retirement so we make sure you don't run out of money. So those are the four general recommendations that you get from the financial advice system, or some combination of those four, right? Maybe we work and to be blunt, all of those choices suck, right? Because they sacrifice your life. If you work longer, well, that's more of your life that you don't have time freedom. If you save more money, there's actually a human cost to that, right? Means you can't take that extra vacation. Maybe you have to work more hours. Maybe you do without certain things. And all of those are reasonable recommendations, but there's a lot more than just simply the math when it comes to creating a retirement plan.
Right.
There's a lot of dials that people can move if you get out of the mindset of financial products and portfolios, which is generally the hub. And we can talk about a lot of examples. So what we do with clients is an agile process that is based off of the agile methodology, but there's three major pillars to a retirement plan process. The first step is have a client dream expansively of what could they do if they had it all. If they could have everything, if they could retire tomorrow or go part-time and they could have their needs, their wants, and their wishes, what would you want if you literally couldn't fail at it? We try to help people think in those terms rather than sacrifice their life before they understand what's possible. And then we organize their financial resources because you're going to pay for your life from three sources of capital. Human capital, which is your ability to earn income. We think of that as a job, but there's lots of different ways to earn money that's not full-time. What doesn't covered by your income can be covered by what we call social capital, which is like pensions and Social Security. And then lastly, whatever isn't covered by those two has to come from your financial capital. And so the first pillar is dream expansively, look at the resources you have and see if it's feasible. And so my goal in a agile process is I want the first iteration to fail miserably. I want their dreams to be so big of what they would want if they could, that they really don't have the resources. And that seems counterintuitive, but the reason I like to do that is because now you have all the things on the table, and then you end up negotiating with yourself. We all know we can't have it all, but we should define what it all is so we can flush it out. So there isn't something that was unsaid by, say, your spouse or your partner or that was unsaid to yourself. And then you end up negotiating with yourself to get to a feasible plan, something that is focused on the things that you truly care about most and that you know from a long-term planning perspective is feasible as a roadmap. And what will happen is, and I've had many instances where people on paper almost are identical, but one, person A or couple A says, their deal killer is I have to get out of this job that's killing me as soon as possible. And so we negotiated understanding that that was what they really needed to solve for. And they were willing to give up sacrifices elsewhere.
I wonder if you've had clients where you go through this process. You say, okay, we need to get your wants and your wishes. And we might fail in the first iteration, as you just said. And they have trouble coming up with them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're definitely
because I think that's probably, again, not that this interview is about me, that's probably the bucket I would fall into. So how do you get people, how do you break the dam, so to speak, and get people to figure out what in the world they want to do with their life?
And you're right, that is a problem for some, right? Well, let's not call it a problem, right? And let's take you, Rob. Let's lay down. Lay on the couch. Let's have a chat. It's a journey, right? Because a lot of us are, especially the people that have the most options in retirement, generally are great accumulators. They're used to self-sacrifice and delayed gratification, everything else. And we're going to do a series on our show next year called Overcoming Frugality.
I was going to ask you about that because I listened to your show. I know you're going to do it. And it's a great topic. So how does what's it mean to overcome frugality, and how does someone actually do it?
Well, what it means to overcome frugality is to realize that you can't take it with you and the way you overcome it is a journey, right? So a good place to start is the thing, to decrease the friction spend money to decrease the friction in your life, right? The classic example
that's a great one
would be mowing the lawn, right? Yeah. When I gave up mowing the lawn, it was a big deal. I was like, the money I could afford, but it was annoying. It was enough money and I sort of enjoyed it, but that decreased the friction. Flying first class, if you can afford it.
Another good one.
That seems silly when you look at the number, but if it decreases the friction and enhances your life and allows you to be more well rested when you're there, etc. So that's a great place to start. So I think really, Rob, it's a journey. And a lot of times why we don't make that journey is we don't have a framework to know whether it's really being flitted away. If I fly first class, just as an example, that's a lot of money. And if I do that consistently, that could really, without a context, we think that could hurt us. I can't afford to spend this money because I might need it when I'm 90. And without a framework to understand that the decision you make today, that you'll still be okay later on, absent that framework, you're likely going to sacrifice because you want to make sure you're okay tomorrow.
So let's talk about the framework. What does that look like, and how can someone build the framework that you envision on their own?
Well, that's
do they read your book? What resources would they use? So what's the framework look like? Because ultimately that is the question, right? How much money can I spend today? How much money can I spend this year without worrying about when I turn 90? So what's that framework look like for you, and how can someone, whether it's books, obviously listen to your podcast, but what resources are available to folks so that they could take your vision of the framework and implement it?
Well, I think the podcast is where that's my laboratory for talking about it and talking through the different elements. The Rock Retirement Club is meant to teach people. We have a master class that walks you in an agile way through building what we call your plan of record, right? So
Okay.
Pier 1 is knowing that your roadmap is feasible, right? But having a feasible plan isn't enough, right? Because it's feasible for me to swim across, a 2.5 mile lake. But what happens if a storm comes in, or what happens if the currents shift? Then the second period, you have to make it resilient. If I'm going to embark on this journey, I have to put some guard rails in place so I don't get thrown off course or swamped with the storm, whether it's a life event or the markets or inflation. And then you get to optimization, which is all the bling of financial planning, right? All the stuff that people talk about most. So those are the three pillars. And so if you get a feasible plan and then you make it resilient, we call that a plan of record, which is our working project model. This is the project that we're on. And that's going to include, and that's what we teach in the class and we talk about on the show. The feasible part of it is mainly financial planning software. Like in the club, we have club members get new Retirement Plus calculator, which is one of the best public facing calculators. So you get the software approach. And then when you make it resilient, you have to actually go to spreadsheets. You have to create your roadmap of how I'm going to pay for life early in retirement. So what a good feasible plan that is resilient is once you know the models say you're fine long-term, we recommend or suggest that people retire having the first 5 years of their life pre-funded. So they know exactly
Is that just in a savings account somewhere, a cash account?
Yeah, you can get, that's the optimization stage. How do you eke out yield? But the key is you want to have that money set aside to essentially be your payroll account, to create your paycheck for yourself when you're not working. And that we have spreadsheet templates that we have there. And what's interesting about this, Rob, to me is, and this is why we think it's a project, not a plan, is you're always iterating. Because when Rob has his plan of record and he starts iterating on that, the problem is his plan's going to change a million times because Rob and his wife or partner, I don't know if you have a wife or partner, they're going to change their mind and you're going to pivot.
She does occasionally from time to time. She's actually in the other room, so I should probably keep my voice down.
And so using a project man, once you have this plan of record, that's really setting up the project. Then the key there, Rob, is what I call creating the wham. Really what people need is the wham. And that's what we try to deliver in an agile way. And that is basically every time you're reviewing your plan of record that you know is feasible and resilient, you're always asking yourself, whether it's verbally or not, well, what do I do next? Or, what should I focus on? What do I do next to improve the plan because of an opportunity or shore up the plan by addressing a risk? So people want to know the what, and then they want to know, okay, once you identify the what, and one thing about that is it's very, if you think of levers that you can pull in your life, because everybody thinks so tactical, we can focus a lot of our energy on things that have very little impact in our life. Right. And in planning, that's generally where most people stay because they read an article about Roth conversions or about, IRMA with Medicare, and they spend all this time thinking about it when they could have a very easy task over here that could have a huge impact on their life that they just totally ignore because it's not very sexy. So we want to know, what do we focus on? And that's what we help people figure out. And then how do I do it? The actual how, and then some assistance and accountability to actually get that little step done, which creates momentum because you've completed it, which leads you back to, well, what do I do next? So an agile approach to planning never ends because it's always, now what do I do? And it's all these little decisions to try to improve the plan. And I think that's where you need to live.
And this is all in the Rock Retirement Club course that folks can take?
This is what we teach them.
Yeah. But I mean that your firm doesn't take new clients, but folks can sign up for the class you're describing. Is that right?
Yeah. So the club is structured around, it gives you the education of how to put this in place. And then it gives you tools to actually do those things. And then it gives you the community of people that are all doing them
Gotcha.
together.
Okay. And what you said, one of the tools is new retirement, right?
Mhm.
That's one that you like, which I've used for a long time. I know Steve and the founder very well.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Um, yeah. And Okay, so that's good. You mentioned, I planned to ask you about this in terms of prioritization, because when you're planning for retirement or in retirement, there's 1,000 little things you could be thinking about. But as you pointed out, you really at least should start with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, right? The things that are going to make a big difference that might be easy to implement. My question for you then is, what are some of those things? What are some of those priorities that you see folks sort of ignoring that they probably should focus on first?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm going to start by saying a lot of this process is you want to think strategy tactics, not tactic strategy, right? You want to think from a strategic level and let that dictate the strategy, the tactical execution of things. And most people approach it an incorrect way. Probably one of the biggest things, if you're within 5 years of retirement, is starting to address boundaries around work. Because what happens as you get closer to retirement is you're used to being on a career track and pleasing your boss and the superiors and the company and working for whether it's the recognition or the promotion or the raise or whatever else. That's a cycle a lot of us have been on for decades. And we can easily sacrifice our life to it because we care so deeply about our teams and what we're doing, right? When
Yeah.
you're close to retirement, one thing, a lot of people, I don't have time. I don't have time to think about what I want afterwards. I'm too busy. I'm traveling, whatever else, is to start realizing, hey, you're not on this career advancement treadmill anymore. And just, so I think one low hanging fruit is start to create some boundaries so you can capture some time to start thinking about the transition that you're getting ready to go to.
Right.
So I think that's a big thing to work on. I think another one is, especially if you're within 5 years of retiring, you ever been to the gym and have seen like those dudes that all they do is upper body? They're just huge walking around. I mean, they're really developed, from the waist up. That is how a lot of us are when we're close to retirement because we're so good at accumulating. The game has been work your butt off, save, reinvest every dollar, embrace investment risk. And we've done that for decades to prepare for retirement. And then we've had the joy of, especially our generation, the joy of updating our net worth statement, seeing those balances go up, saying, this is how much I saved this year. All that affirmation cycle that comes from all that saving. So we're like really strong accumulators. Well, when you get close to retirement, that changes. You're decumulating. You're switching from a decumulation or from a sowing to a reaping standpoint. And so that's like all your legs. Now you're so big up here and you're supposed to run a marathon and you've never developed those muscles. So think of what happens. And so that transition from accumulation mindset to decumulation mindset and what that actually means is, I think, low-hanging fruit that if you understand that, it makes everything else a lot easier.
Yeah, that was the biggest shock to me. I retired about 4 years ago. Now I ended up going back and doing more work, and I have a side business, so I'm not really spending my nest egg right now. But when I sold part of my business, I thought, okay, that's it. I'm going to be spending my nest egg. And psychologically, it's a very, very difficult thing to do for me, just like you've described. And at one point, it was because the fear of running out of money. But after a while, you kind of get used to that. At least I have, and that's not really the fear anymore. Although it helps when the market's doing well. So,
Yeah, yeah.
if the market crashes, maybe that fear will come back. But it was also kind of like you described. I just like doing barbell curls. I like accumulating money. I don't really do that many barbell curls, but you like accumulating money. It's fun to invest it. The thought of watching your balance go down, who likes that? So, how do you overcome that?
Well, that's why it has to be a process and not a plan.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. Um, when you left work, did you know you're going to be doing part-time work or build this side
No,
business?
no. I mean, I thought that I might some point down the road. I had a non-compete, so I couldn't really do much for 2 years in terms of my own business. I ended up doing some work though. It fell into my lap. You know how this happens. Like 3 weeks after I sell my business, I get a call from Forbes, and they want me to do some things for them, and I was allowed to do that. And that was enough to sustain us financially, but it was totally unexpected. And then eventually I started, my website's back up, and I'm doing this podcast, right? And a few other. I got a YouTube channel, and so we live off of that income now.
And
And so
I
I've sort of accidentally unretired.
but I'm guessing you probably have more control of your time and time freedom.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't do it otherwise. If I had to go to an office 8 hours a day, I wouldn't be doing this.
And in
Yeah,
surveying our audience over the years, probably one of the biggest insights I've had is asking them what retirement actually means. Because I use the word just simply because that's the word that's used.
yeah,
But my understanding is most people don't want to not do anything.
yeah,
They just want to slow down and have some control of their time,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think, low hanging fruit from if you understand this, it makes it much more multidimensional than the classical way is retirement is framed in planning as a light switch. You're working, you're not. Most people don't want that. So if you can think more multidimensionally and think of it like a dimmer switch where you can get out of the rat race, take a breath, most people, and this is true in my private practice as well, are doing something because they enjoy it and they're earning some money from it. And it's the
Right.
pace of life that's really the difference, not
Yeah,
not working.
yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let me drop down to some tactics. I guess this would qualify as tactics. At some point, you can do all the planning to talk about all sort of the psychological issues. Uh, But at some point, a retiree needs to know, okay, how much can I spend in the first year of retirement? What's the number? And it may be a range, I suppose. I don't know. But how do you think through that question, and how do you advise folks in trying to answer that?
And this is where I think planning, even a professional planner, you get beyond the charts and the graphs to the, okay, exactly how does this work and what do I do? It starts to get a lot lower resolution. And so the way that I'll just tell you how we do it, and this is what the course teaches too, is once we know it's feasible and we're making it resilient, we want someone to go into retirement with a contingency fund and then an income floor, which will be anywhere from prepaying for life 2 to 5 years out. And then, so if you have $1 million, let's say, you're going to have your normal contingency emergency fund. And let's say after part-time work and pension or Social Security, you need $100,000 from your portfolio. These numbers aren't going to work right, but you get the point. Well,
Yeah.
then that means if you need $100,000 a year for the next 5 years, you need $500,000 is basically prepaying your consumption. So that $1 million,
Okay.
half of that is going to go to consuming. And then you have $500,000 left, and that goes to upside portfolio. And so I call it a pie cake. First layer, we have multiple asset allocations. We have contingency, and we have the income floor, which pays for your life early. And then we have the upside portfolio that will help pay for future life. Because you have two big risks when you're allocating assets in retirement. from a financial standpoint. You have near term, you have sequence of return, markets just being bad right up front. And long term, you have inflation. So those are the two things. And we're on a teeter-totter trying to balance those two. So to your question, once we identify how much they need in years 1 through 4 or 5, say, we identify what accounts are we going to get that money from.
Yep.
And there's some tax planning in there. And then now that we know the accounts that we're going to get the money from, we set up, we sequester or segregate that money, and we call that a payroll reserve to pay for years 1 through 5. So psychologically, it's like a bucket system.
So if someone said to you, okay, that sounds good. I'm going to take my 5 years of income need, whatever that number is, and I'm going to invest it in, say, I don't know, 50% index funds, stock index funds, and 50% bond index funds. Would you say, no, slow down. It's got to be all in cash? How would you think through investing that 5 year? I'll call it a bucket. It almost to me sounds like the bucket strategy, but slice and pie, or whatever you want to call it. How would you invest that 5 years?
And so to answer, what is that money for? That money, and this is basically a pension management way of doing things, an asset liability matching. So if Rob needs $100,000 in 3 years, that's really a liability on your balance sheet. You owe $100,000 in 3 years. And so we're matching your assets to that liability. Your spending is a liability. So, but to answer your question, cash, in ideal world, you would buy a inflation adjusted security that matured right before you needed the money, right? Yeah. So you neutralize inflation. If you need 100,000 3 years from now, you take $100,000, you buy a inflation adjusted security that matures right before you need it. Now you've prepaid it. In reality, we use high yield money markets. We use CDs. We'll look at 3-year fixed annuities. You can look at tips. You can look at individual bonds that mature on a certain date. It's really not the environment for that, but we've had periods of time where we'll actually buy bonds that mature right before they need the money.
So how would you respond to someone who said that's going to end up creating a portfolio that's got too much in short-term, fixed income, and that it's going to really hurt? You don't want to take too much risk, but maybe the argument that that's too conservative. How would you respond to that?
Too much relative to what? Right?
Well, relative to a portfolio that, and I think in terms of percentages when I do asset allocation, I don't think in terms of years of expenses, that you'd be better off coming up with an asset allocation based on percentages, 60-40, 70-30, whatever, and only taking out from that in terms of cash what you need, say, in a given year. So you're still going to have probably years 2 through 5, and maybe even longer, depending on how much money you have, in some form of fixed income, right? But it's going to be allocated based on percentages rather than pulling out from the allocation 5 years of expenses.
I think,
and you're going to have ups and downs. If the stock market crashes, though, that's okay, because you'll sell fixed income to buy stocks, which is exactly what we want to do. Anyway, that would be sort of the alternative in my mind.
And that approach is essentially taking asset allocation and investment management from an accumulation mindset and trying to fit in the decumulation model, which is where we come up with the 4% rule and things like that. Right, now you can accomplish it that way, right? I think a lot of this is accounting, because one is, what are we trying to solve for? We have to understand that. And in retirement, unlike accumulation, we're not trying to solve for optimization of returns relative to risk that we're taking, which is what efficient market theory says, right? Or modern portfolio. We're trying to minimize risk for a given level of potential return. And in modern portfolio theory, inflows was never in the universe of that model. That was about accumulating assets. Yeah. In retirement, what we're trying to solve for is life outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So I am not against a systematic withdrawal model in the way you speak, but first you have to know feasible, because when you create a feasible plan, we put people into three buckets. They're either underfunded for the spending they want, they're constrained, or they're overfunded. And it's important to understand that, because if you're overfunded, meaning you have much more in assets than you have in spending liabilities, you can do a systematic withdrawal because you have so much excess. You can absorb a period of time when stocks and bonds go down because you have so much excess. It's okay to do a systematic, but the more you get into the constrained category, which is where most people are, the more you better secure the outcomes. And what ends up happening, Rob, when you go through this exercise, actually, when you have contingency, floor, upside, you end up getting to a fairly balanced model because the upside can have more equities.
Yeah.
Because essentially it's a time horizon structure.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't put money into something for if you needed the money in 4 years, you're probably not going to put 60% of it in stocks.
Yeah. So so folks listening and they're thinking, well, am I underfunded or overfunded or constrained? I mean, do you see the 4% rule as at least a rough starting place to think about that issue? Or how do you help clients determine whether they're underfunded, or overfunded?
You build a household balance sheet and understand the liabilities that you have from a spending standpoint. That's what the class does. You get to that's how you determine your feasibility, is through building your household balance sheet to see how overfunded or underfunded you are. And once you know that will help to determine the toolbox for how you make it resilient. So as an example, if somebody is highly constrained, the knee jerk would be, well, I need to take more investment risk to get less constrained, right?
Yeah.
That's actually the last thing you want to do, because you can't afford the risk of taking more
Right.
investment risk. It will just
Right.
exacerbate an already tight situation. So somebody that's highly constrained is going to have a more safety first approach, which Wade Fowles talks about, because there's this dial from safety first on one extreme to systematic withdrawal on the other extreme. Where you are at between those two extremes is going to be dependent, one, on your personality profile, which people are just now developing things to solve for. And it's also going to be determined by how funded you
Right.
are.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't it, at the end of the day, it still comes down to numbers, right? So like, I'm guessing if someone said, I got $1 million, I'm going to spend 100,000 the first year, and that's going to be my income floor. I'm going to guess I don't care what tool
They're
you
probably not
use.
funded. They're probably
Yeah,
underfunded.
right. If they say I want to take 40 grand out or maybe even 50 grand, well, okay, it's probably roughly in the ballpark. I suppose for your course, I know you mentioned new retirement. So new retirement comes up with numbers. But in order to come up with those numbers, the user of the tool, right, has to make an assumption about the returns and future inflation. So I know I'm getting into the weeds, and we don't have to go down too far down the rabbit hole, I suppose. But those two things are a big concern for people. The returns are a concern because stocks are at all-time highs, more or less, and bonds are at all-time highs, meaning the yields are low. Although the 10-year has been rising today, who knows? And people are scared of inflation. So how do you, I mean, again, folks can take your class, obviously, to get into the nitty-gritty, but just do you think we're in sort of the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times? Are we living in interesting times right now?
We always are. That's sort of the crux of that saying, right? That's a lot, Rob. So first off, I think the one reason that's why an agile approach is more important than ever.
Yeah.
So one story I tell people is that, hey, and I'm going to use I'm going to say trailer, and that's not a bad thing, but most people don't live in a trailer. I tell people, and very wealthy people, it's like, look, we can do everything right, and you may still have to live in a trailer. And it's the truth, because the hard part with this type of planning is you cannot figure it out. It is unknowable. It's unknowable what inflation is going to be. It's unknowable what returns are going to be. It's unknowable what your life is going to be. That's just as fluid as all these other things we're talking about, life events happening and so forth. And given that, you better have a very well thought out process to make lots of little conversations so you can identify risks and opportunities early enough to take little actions rather than big actions. That is the best we have. And that's one reason why we've adopted an agile methodology. So to answer your question on inflation and returns in the class, we have new retirement calculator, which is more of a traditional forward-looking calculator, which has return assumptions. In the class, when we build a household balance sheet, we have no return assumptions. We actually bring back to net present value everything today. So if we're talking about spending, what Rob and his wife are going to spend when they're 85, and let's call it 180,000 inflation adjusted, we discount that back to make it a present value as of today. So we can look at we know what your assets are, right? We know what your assets are.
Right.
We bring back to present value all the cash flows for Social Security and pension, and we do the same thing for the spending so we can compare them more apples to apples. That is much more conservative. And what ends up happening than traditional software, because what ends up happening if you forecast forward, which is the traditional sense, and I do that with Monte Carlo scenarios and et cetera, what ends up happening is, especially with Monte Carlo, the scenarios, the time frame is so long, the possible outcomes just spread.
Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah. So now when you bring everything back down, you make zero prediction on investment returns, and you're dealing essentially with your inflation assumption and your discount rate.
Okay.
Right. Which are
so
still
if folks
unknown.
want to find your class, they go to rockretirementclub.com?
Rockretirementclub.com is where the course and the community, all of that is talked about.
Okay. And how long does the course, like if someone wants to go through the course, how long does it take or how long does it last?
Yeah, it's 9 modules and it's structured as an agile project. So it's little baby steps starting from the first, remember the yellow brick road, when you start on the first step, you have to go back. You start and you iterate. People do it at their own pace.
Okay, well, that's terrific. I'm going to check it out myself because it may be perfect for me. So folks that want to follow you, follow your work, your writing, where should they go?
Best place to find me is in podcasts on the Retirement Answer Man show. That's where we do everything.
Okay. I've been listening to that. It's funny. I'm not a big podcast person, but I started listening to your show and enjoy it immensely. You're doing a great job. It's really helping a lot of people.
Thank you. It's my lab. I don't have any illusions that I haven't figured out. I'm trying to be a very organized thinker about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Roger, thanks for tolerating my persistent tactical questions. And
I like it.
Thank you for coming on the show.
You bet, buddy. Have a great holiday.